Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Insights, the podcast that focuses everything temperature-controlled logistics for the pharmaceutical industry. My name's Thomas Hunt, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by Mario Iannizzi, who is a senior supply chain planner, Olympus Medical Systems EMEA. Mario, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, hi everyone. Very good, Thomas. What about you?
Very well. It's great to have you on, so thank you for taking the time. I think a good place to always start is if maybe you could give us a bit of background to your career so far, and then obviously covering your current role there at Olympus and what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, hi everyone. My name is Mario Iannizzi and I am the senior supply chain planner for the European market at Olympus. Maybe for those who are not familiar with Olympus, Olympus is a global medtech company which is delivering advanced solutions for detection, diagnosis, and minimal invasive treatment. So my background is pura medtech background. I work in this industry for over 10 years now with a strong focus in supply chain and in planning related function. Since last year, I also got certified as a certified professional forecaster from the IBF. So yeah, over the course of year, I developed strong interest, especially in planning. Yeah, Thomas, it's my pleasure to be here today. I hope that I can bring a little bit of planning perspective into the cold chain ecosystem.
100%. We're going to dive into that. So obviously we want to really focus around integrated business planning, which I know is one of your expertise and something you do want to focus on. I know you're speaking at Logipharma as well this year, so we all look forward to sort of seeing you there and listening to the session. But for listeners who aren't familiar with that topic, can you explain what IBP is and why it matters so much in supply chain planning in your perspective?
Yeah. So IBP stands for Integrated Business Planning. This is basically a collaborative process that not only aim to balance supply and demand. This is what typically is happening also in the S&OP, but IBP, it's an enhancement of that. So on top of balancing supply and demand, also aim to align this with commercial and financial into a single plan. And I think this is the key point, is the cross-functional collaboration. So in alternative with what is usually happening in the classic planning, you may organization end up in a situation in which I call it silos planning. Each department end up in planning against its own number. So typically finance do their plan against financial target, commercial they do against the commercial landing point, supply chain they do against their production plan. And at the end of the day, you have so many numbers going around your organization. And this is what IBP want to overcome. So IBP, through the cross-functional collaboration, want to align in a set of assumptions which are shared by all the different functions, and upon that, build a single plan. This plan, usually it's covering mid, long-term horizon. It's up to 36 months. And this is reviewed on a monthly basis. This is the real importance of IBP. It's a monthly cycle. So every month you can spot if there is a gap in your plan or in your assumption, and you can take ahead of time decision. Because at the end, IBP, it's not getting perfect number on a paper, but it's rather giving the organization the possibility to react on time. So if you spot there is some gap in your plan, maybe you are behind target, ahead of time, you get a warning and you can react. This is all about IBP. So it's about aligning inventory policies with supply chain strategy as well as with commercial strategy, and having real time the financial impact. So I think that's what really matters the most, because give to the supply chain possibility to turn from reactive mode into a more proactive mode.
Yeah, nice. And just out of curiosity, how do you see the difference between IBP and S&OP? I know they sort of can be quite similar. Explain the differences from your perspective and how you see it.
Yeah, so first of all, S&OP is a concept that is born earlier. So IBP can be seen as an enhancement of the S&OP. So basically, in the past, there was the need for aligning supply and demand. So most of this conversation around S&OP, they were based about quantity. So it was more about aligning supply and demand from operational perspective. Usually the time horizon that is covered by S&OP, it's shorter, maybe it's 12 to 18 months, because it's very much focusing on delivery and operation and so on. Well,
Hmm.
IBP, it's an extension of the S&OP approach, but to the overall organization. So you're not only anymore aligning only supply and demand, which is maybe it's more the supply chain part of that, but you are extending this to your finance department, to your commercial department, to your strategic department. So the concept is the same. It's more
Hmm.
like scaling up the concept to the overall organization. And at the end of the day, something very important is that IBP is not a SCM process.
Hmm.
It's a organizational process. So at the end of the day, the time where IBP really turn into strategic is when it's used to taking decision. It's a tool that management they have on their end to drive the business, because within the IBP they can get early enough warnings about some gap in delivering the commercial plan, and they can react on time. So I think this is the main difference, that IBP is more management driven tool.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And based on your experience with IBP, how do planning decisions influence what cold chain has to handle later on?
Yeah, so I believe that a lot of the stress which is along the entire supply chain, it's generated, or maybe let me rephrase, can be mitigated by planning decision.
Hmm.
Because if you imagine a situation in which your planning department it's delivering forecasts which are inaccurate and they are changing on a monthly basis. At
Hmm.
the end of the day, what will happen is that your operation, they will always reacting. They will react on the last minute, maybe because there is stock out, there is not enough inventory. So your supply chain is constantly fighting. It may look at a first glance a logistic issue, but it's not. It's more beyond. It's a planning issue.
Hmm.
And I think this is where IBP can really improve, because it's quite well demonstrated that company that implement IBP well, they not only make the supply chain more agile, but they make it more predictable. And by doing
Hmm.
so, you can turn your entire supply chain into more reactive and also remove pressure from the downstream part of the supply chain, which is operation at the end of the day.
Yeah, and can you give examples around how does IBP could help reduce emergency shipments in cold chain? Because obviously it does come up quite often in our sector where people are having to rush to get product out that's not expected, and how this process can help.
Yeah, 100%. So maybe let's give an example.
Mm.
So you are underestimating your demand in a specific regional distribution center, and then as a consequence of that, you don't have enough inventory to fulfill the customer demand. In my case, it's hospital. So hospital are ordering and you cannot fulfill this
Hmm.
demand. When you look this very much on the surface, it may look a logistic problem that your organization is not able to logistically deliver what the markets want. But at the end, this is a planning issue, because your plan not only it was not correct in the starting point, but also the planning team was not able to drive conversation to mitigate this issue, this gap later on. And this is basically what you can do with IBP, because even though your assumption maybe was wrong in the first place, which
Hmm.
can happen, but through your constant and through the monthly cycle that you drive with the IBP, you may spot that there is a gap in your plan, and so you may have react. For example, you can say, okay, in this regional distribution center, I have no stock. I see that the demand is rising up, but maybe to the other side of the globe, maybe in the US, I have so much stock, so I can move in inventory well in advance. And
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
this way, you avoid a situation in which you need to hurry up and maybe having emergency shipment in the last minute.
And when a customer like a hospital is effectively forecasting, under forecasting, how, in your experience, do you handle that in terms of customers giving you forecasts that are not necessarily accurate, and then you having to react to those? Is there something in the planning that you've seen that really works in that scenario, or a check that you can make?
Yeah, so based on my experience, we are not planning at hospital level. We are
Hmm.
more planning at a regional level. This is
Hmm.
at least the setup I've seen so far. But indeed, you always end up in a situation. I mean, if there is one thing that is sure in forecast is that it's always wrong. You can never achieve a situation where you have 100% accuracy. Maybe
Mm.
you are if you are very lucky, but no,
Yeah.
it's always going to be wrong. So I think the key here is to monitor what are your performance in terms of forecast, try to make it as stable as possible.
Hmm.
And whenever you spot there is some gap, try to take corrective actions with due time. This is about IBP. It's taking decision. You don't want to have a number where everyone is very happy about this number, but then don't trigger the right discussions. So it's better to have a number visible, which doesn't make happy some certain department in the
Hmm.
first place, but then you are driving action. How do we close this gap? Do we need to invest more into marketing to achieve our commercial strategies? Do we need to invest more into operation? So this is about IBP, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the biggest conflict between service level, shelf life, and cold chain costs in your experience?
Yeah, so this is a very common trade-off that you have
Mm.
in supply chain and more particularly in planning, because on one side you want to ensure stock availability. On the other side, you also have cost limitation, because cost and space limitation, you cannot store infinite inventory at your warehouse. So
Hmm.
this is a very much a trade-off where IBP can support on taking this decision, because through the IBP you can deliver a single set of number where you know commercial and finance where your organization needs to focus on,
Hmm.
and you can, upon that, your supply chain can define specific inventory policy. So, for example, to return to the example of before, maybe in the European distribution center, you don't need so much stock, but maybe this is need in the US distribution center, and you
Hmm.
can move inventory around. So in this case, it can help you to have this trade-off, because you can optimize the value you give over time.
Okay. And how does collaboration play a role then in sort of integrated business planning, especially when managing products with limited shelf life and sort of short constraints?
Yeah, so collaboration is the key of IBP. So it's the foundation. You need to make sure, and this is where most of the organization are struggling, that maybe the process is set up. But when not all the functions are well onboarded, they believe 100% in this process,
Hmm.
this is where it's the most challenging point. Collaboration is key because it making happen that cross-functional, you align on a set of assumptions, and as a consequence on that, you are building your plan. So
Hmm.
you are making sure that your plan is realistic, it's enough, and it's achievable. And once this is happening, then this supports the operational execution later on. So collaboration is key. You don't need you need a process, you need technology, but you need to have all function on board that and believe in this process.
And how much do you involve your partners in that collaboration and sharing what your integrated business plan is versus, or is this an internal thing effectively that you're talking about?
Yeah, all right. So basically, whenever we are sharing forecast or in general having IBP conversation, yeah, it really matters which communication you are using,
Mm.
because and this helps the collaboration. So in case you are speaking with your supply plan, which is a module of the IBP, maybe you may want to speak in quantity. Whenever you are speaking with your finance or when you are speaking with the management, you want to speak in revenue, because this is
Hmm.
what matters to them. There are different ways of communicating your forecast depending on the stakeholder you're speaking with.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, it's a cross-functional collaboration. Most of the time, planning team, they own the process, but the number itself, they're owned by the business unit, they're owned by the marketing. And finance joining the process to approve this plan, to make sure that this is aligned with or which are the financial expectation. So it's not just giving number and sharing it around, it's
Hmm.
more building the number together, and the planning team is the one that is giving the schedule, it's supporting the conversation, but then it's to happen accordingly by all the different departments involved.
Yeah. And so what happens operationally when forecasts are inaccurate, or how does it translate into cold chain risks or general pharma logistic risks?
Yeah, so in general, it's quite simple to explain. And maybe, yeah, if you are under forecasting, you end up in a situation in which your demand is too high, it's
Hmm.
as you predicted in advance, and you end up in a situation where you have stock out, so you may lose customer. In the context of medtech, it's even more struggle, because maybe some patient out of there cannot be treated into the hospital. So this also involves patient safety of those people around us in our community. And on the other side, you may also have additional costs because in order to treat patient, you may want to have last minute shipment, which may involve also in the cold chain. On the other side, if you are over forecasting, this also has an impact because you have too much inventory, so you have additional warehouse costing. And also you may have, especially in the cold chain environment, you may end up in a situation in which your goods are going to expire, so you need to scrap them, and again, more cost. So I would say these are the two extreme, and you need to find the right balance among these two, especially depending on the product which you are serving.
Yeah. And how do you forecast influence MRP parameters then? So how does this impact logistics and operational decisions?
Yeah, so MRP parameter, an example of that, it may be safety stock, minimum order quantity, and I guess this is really the key piece that is connecting the planning together with the operations and the operational execution. Because MRP parameter, same as most of the supply chain parameter, they are based on forecasts which are delivered by the planning team. So if the forecast is inaccurate, then of course this will have an impact into the downstream execution. Let me give you an example. So maybe upon your forecast, you decide that for a specific product, you want to have 2 containers ship on a weekly basis from your manufacturing site. If you are over forecasting your demand, then you end up in a situation in which maybe you don't need 2 containers, you need only one per week. And then your operation are struggling because maybe they need to cancel booking or maybe the container is not fully utilized. On the other side, if you're underestimating the demand, you may not need 2 containers, but you need 3 per week. And so again, it's stress on the operation because in the last minutes, they need to find a booking for a new container, which is not very easy. Always depend on the agility of your supplier. But I think the MRP parameter probably is the key to understand how planning decisions are affecting the downstream operation and of course also the cold chain part of it.
Yeah. And obviously you're probably always wrestling with this, but how do you explain wrong forecast risk to senior leadership and your management to make sort of forecast more strategic?
Yeah, so this is always, maybe it's getting closer to the point I was touching before. It's always about conversation and using the right language with the stakeholder you're having with. So in general, not only when forecast risk, but when describing or telling about forecast to the management, I always recommend maybe to speak what they care the most, which is revenue, for example, speaking about values. If maybe within your IPP cycle, you realize that there is one batch of inventory which is going to expire in 90 days, instead of maybe phrasing in this way, I will phrase, we have 3 million of inventory that is going to expire in 90 days. We need to take some action now to mitigate this risk. And I guess this really gives the feelings and the urgency of what the risk you want to share and really turn planning into strategic.
Yeah. And in your experience then, what cultural change is needed to make shelf life products better?
Yeah, so here in my opinion, we need to move from ensuring maximum service level for every product into optimizing value over time. So it's unrealistic and probably it's also the wrong approach to have the wish of targeting the same service level for every product because maybe some products are different than the other. They require different service level. Maybe in the case of my industry, some products are capital product, so an hospital do not expect them to be delivered tomorrow because it's a huge investment and also your expectations are different, rather than maybe if you're delivering a consumable which is needed on a daily basis. So here it's very important to understand what really brings value over time and maximize that, focusing on that part.
Yeah.
Maybe on this it really helps of segmenting your portfolio of product.
Yeah. And so how do you balance service level targets there with shelf life limitations in your personal planning?
Yeah, so IBP, it's an help on that because it's giving you over time where the supply chain needs to focus to deliver the commercial target. But then it's also important, as I was touching before, it's to segment your portfolio, especially for organization which they have a huge variety of portfolio with long tail. It's very useful tool to have a segmentation of it. There are different approach you can use. You may segment based on revenue wise. So typically you end up into a ABC segmentation, which is Pareto rule. So you end up with 20% of your product creating the 80% of your revenue. Another segmentation may be on the stability of the demand, or also maybe more easy if your product are fast runner or low runner. And based on that, you can take logistic decisions. So if you have a fast runner which needs to be delivered quickly to your hospital, in my case, you may want to decide to locate them close to the hospital so that you are faster on delivering them. Or if you have slow mover, you may want to decide to centralize the inventory in a single location and deliver from there through your hospital. So you minimize the risk of scrapping and having too much inventory. So I really encourage everyone to use segmentation. This is a really fantastic tool that you can use to understand where to focus.
Yeah, and so in your experience as a planner, how should planners collaborate better with finance, commercial, and operations? What's best practice in your view?
Yeah, so here it's very important to engage, right? And for a department to engage, they need to believe in what they are doing, and they need to understand that this is bringing value to them. Because when they see that the process is bringing value, then it's where you get their buy-in. And most of the time, one of the experience I had so far, it's about communication. So it's how you communicate with departments. In my experience, I was starting speaking with finance or with commercial, explaining them forecasting quantity, and then I totally lost their attention because they have no clue of what quantity is. They on a daily basis they review about revenue. So, and this is very important because the day that you switch and maybe you speak what they care the most, it's when you get their attention because this is something that is close on their daily business. So I really think it's important to adapt the language with the stakeholder and also the way how you go into detail. So if you are into an executive meeting, you don't need to go on a SKU detail, you need to go to business unit detail. And maybe it's opposite if you go with a marketing specialist that it's very focused on a specific product. It's very important to adapt the communication because this is the way you have to make a common ground and to make everyone believe in the process. And there where the collaboration is really bringing in value.
Yeah. And which KPIs do you use to track forecast accuracy now then? And how do they help you sort of managing limited shelf life products?
Yeah, so within the IBP, usually whenever you start your monthly cycle, the first question it should be, have we done what we say? So it's looking retrospective to identify if there is some structural gap in your assumption. And there are several KPI you can use. The most used in the industry is forecast error and forecast bias. They can be calculated in a different way, but the most common it's based on the average error that you have between forecast and actuals. And the forecast error, typically, this is an absolute value. So it only tells you how much error there is in your forecast. And respectively, if you are under forecasting or over forecasting, it only tells you you have 30% of error, for example. And this, it's a good information because you know the accuracy of your forecast. You know, okay, my forecast has an accuracy of 70%. Another very good parameter is the forecast bias, this is usually calculated over a longer time horizon, and this is not absolute. So this can be positive or negative. And depending on that, this is giving you a feeling if there is a tendency in your forecast in over forecasting or under forecasting. And I believe the combination of the two of them, it's really a good basis because you can understand what is your error and in which direction your error is going. Then there are many more KPI, but I would say a good way for analyzing your forecast error and bias, they are already a good basis. And it's very important to not only have the KPI there in a dashboard, but they need to be used for having diagnosis to check if the assumption you align previously, if they're making sense. Because if you align on a certain assumption and you see this is not delivered within your forecast KPI, you have a loop back. You can challenge the assumption and see if this needs to be changed and update your plan. And as we said before, you update your plan and therefore also all your inventory strategy to avoid that in the last minute you need to make operational adjustment.
Yeah, and if you could improve one thing in IBP to protect sort of product and integrity and patient outcomes, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say in most of the IBP review I've seen so far, most of the KPI are service level, then there are forecast accuracy, there is inventory overall value to check if your inventory value is increasing or decreasing. But one of the KPI I would include probably is the expire awareness KPI. So it's not only an KPI that is saying your inventory is 100, but giving you warnings. Let's say out of your 100 inventory value, which can be dollar, can be euro, you have out of these 50 million are going to expire in 12 months. And this, I believe, it's very valuable information because within the IBP, then commercial and finance are aware of that. And there you can trigger discussion. What do we do? So maybe with this information, commercial can push for some marketing activities for selling the stock, can maybe sell this stock for a discounted price to avoid that it's going to be expired. So some awareness about expiration of the inventory, that especially in the cold chain related operation, it's very important.
Yeah, and so how can digital tools help connect planning with execution then? In terms of the kit that you've seen out and the sort of technologies available, where are we headed with technology in this area?
Yeah, so I strongly believe that people and processes, they are coming first. So we always say you need to make sure that if you give a Ferrari to someone, this someone has a driving license to drive this Ferrari. So for me, the basis is having people and processes equipped. But then, of course, the more the maturity of your process is increasing, the technology becomes more and more important. So we have seen nowadays the role of the planner changed a lot compared to what was used in the past. Maybe in the past, a planner was spending a lot of time in creating statistical forecasts. Today, this is not needed anymore because technology can do it much better, through machine learning, to all the powerful technology we have these days. And this can also free up time to the planner to focus on this part of the process that is really bringing value, which is collaboration. It's sitting down to marketing and adding business intelligence to the statistics. So supporting the technology on those things where the technology only looking retrospective cannot know about. This is one point. So it's focusing on where it's really adding value and leaving the calculation stuff to the technology, but also technology can help you on making visible what is not visible into Excel spreadsheets. So can help you with scenario planning, for example, which is something that of course you can do into an Excel, but it takes you very long time that the time you're over, probably this scenario it already realized. So it doesn't really help you. So IBP it's always about triggering the right discussion in the right time and taking some decision. If you need several weeks for running your scenario analysis, it's not needed anymore. So I would say these two areas where technology can really help on every collaboration and critical discussion.
And so what role then does scenario planning play in IBP?
Yeah, I think this play a very important role, especially when the maturity of the IBP that you have established in your organization is going to increase. Scenario planning, it becomes very, very important. An example, scenario planning are what if analysis. Typical example that maybe it's on my industry, you have a big tender going on and your company wants to apply or not. So with scenario planning, you can answer the question, in case we apply for this tender, in case we have this additional increase of demand, can our supply make it happen? And if so, at what cost? because maybe you need to, for the next 6 months, also having weekend shift at your production site to make sure you produce so much to fulfill this peak on demand. And then with this, your management can take the decision to fulfill this demand. It costs us X amount of money. Do we want to apply for this tender because we know we will have this return on our investment or not? And I think this is a typical example where technology support this discussion, because most of the time it's a decision which needs to be taken very fast because the window for apply for a tender is very short. So technology really helped there. And this for me it's a typical example of where a mature IBP it's really bringing value to your company, because then management is able to take in the decision having full in mind what is the financial implication and not discovering this maybe in the last.
Yeah, and then okay, and from a sort of planner's perspective, what advice would you give cold chain professionals?
So I will give the advice to engage with your planner counterpart as soon as you can, because a lot of stress that maybe today it's on your desk, it's stress that it's created by planning decision, which maybe also can even not take into account if this is feasible from operational perspective. So if you engage early enough both sides, then this can really help, because can change some decisions which are taken on the upstream planning. And also another advice is don't challenge at the output. Usually also as a planner, I never like to change on the output on the specific number, but really challenging on the assumption. So which are the assumption behind your plan? Because the number itself is just a consequence of your assumption. So if your assumption is wrong, then you are going to revise the plan. And probably this is where also planner, but in general, when you have collaborations, maybe the people are the less touch, because sometimes you may have reaction of people defending their work and maybe feeling finger pointed. But when you speak about assumption, this is where you're really making sure that it's not about your work, it's about the assumption that was used, that maybe it's not realistic enough and you need to review. So I would say collaborate as much as you can with your planner, both direction and also challenge assumption rather than the output.
Yeah, good. Well, look, I know we're sort of pretty much out of time, Mario, and so I want to thank you for coming on, and it was a fantastic session and a massive amount covered there, so I really appreciate your time. You are speaking at Logipharma. Do you know which day you're speaking and where people might be able to find you at that event?
Yeah, I will speak on the Tuesday. I will speak on the Tuesday in the early afternoon. So I will host a roundtable about IBP and how to increase collaboration with financial and commercial partner. So yeah, it will be on the first day, on the Tuesday afternoon.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend you get down to that session. And Mario, again, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's my pleasure to be here, and I hope I could bring a little bit of planning perspective into the cold chain ecosystem.
100%. And I think it's a lot of, we've touched on this topic before with some global heads of logistics, etc. But to come directly from your seat is really interesting. So thank you for that insight. It was fantastic. So good. You've been listening to Cold Chain Insights. My name's Thomas Hunt. Thank you for listening, and please tune in next week for our next episode. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.